Forget everything you've seen on those pretty tourist postcards. What we consider Rome's main attraction today was actually the most sophisticated and cynical death factory in human history. You think you know the history of the Colosseum. Believe me, you're only seeing the marble mask that hides a true nightmare. In this video, we are going to descend into a place even contemporaries were afraid to look. Into the stifling, dark underground, where a monstrous machine operated, turning murder into an assembly line. You will find out whose stolen gold and whose broken lives actually paid for every stone of this giant. We will tell you why Roman matrons bought gladiator sweat for insane amounts of money, and why emperors staged naval battles in the arena, flooding the city center with blood and water. A story awaits you about a mad ruler who went out to fight cripples and ostriches, and how the empire's greatest monument was dismantled for centuries to provide building materials for palaces and cathedrals. This is not a dry history lesson. This is a story about the greed, technology, lust, and cruelty upon which Rome stood. Get the kids away from the screens and get ready to see the Colosseum as it really was. A place where hell rose to the surface of the earth. Watch until the end to find out why, even today, when we take selfies in front of these ruins, we remain accomplices to an ancient crime. Burning. The sticky, sickly sweet smell of coagulated blood and fear soaking the cobblestones of the Forum. The year is 69 AD. Rome isn't just in crisis, it's in agony. The world's greatest empire is devouring itself like a crazed beast caught in a trap. In a single year, in just one revolution of the sun, 3 emperors changed on the throne: Galba, Otho, Vitellius. 3 dead men. Their reigns were measured not in years but in months, and ended the same way, with a dagger to the throat, or falling on their own sword. Civil war had turned the eternal city into a slaughterhouse, where a citizen's life was worth less than a jug of sour wine. The treasury is empty. The legions on the borders are grumbling, unpaid. The people, accustomed to bread and circuses, now see only ash and ruins. One question hangs in the air, heavy as a grave slab. Who is next? Who will dare to put on the purple, knowing that it is, essentially, a dead man's shroud? And then, he steps onto the stage. Titus Flavius Vespasian, not an aristocrat with slender fingers and a lineage tracing back to the gods. No, he is the son of a tax collector, a rough soldier whose face resembled a peasant chewing a turnip. They called him the mule driver, and the Senate turned up their noses at his barracks humor. But this man understood something inaccessible to the pampered patricians. You cannot save an empire with pretty speeches. You cannot save it with prayers to Jupiter. You can only save it with concrete and blood. Vespasian looked at Rome not as a shrine, but as a distressed asset requiring strict crisis management. He needed legitimacy. He needed a right to power that no conspirator with a knife up his sleeve could challenge. And he found that right not in laws, but in the psychology of the crowd. A gaping wound lay in the center of Rome. A huge territory stolen by Nero, the emperor whose name was cursed on every corner. Nero, in his insane selfishness, had burned half the city to build his golden house, a palace of monstrous proportions, surrounded by parks and a giant artificial lake. Imagine, in the heart of an overpopulated metropolis, where people huddled in shaky high-rise tenements ready to collapse from a sneeze, one man grabbed an estate the size of a small town. It was an insult. It was a spit in the face of every Roman. Vespasian, that pragmatic cynic, saw his chance in the hatred for Nero. He performed a brilliant political pirouette that modern spin doctors would call a masterpiece of populism. "I am not building a palace for myself," every gesture and decree seemed to say. "I am returning Rome to you." The plan was audacious to the point of madness. Destroy the traces of Nero's luxury. Tear down the palace walls. But what to do with the lake? With this giant body of water reflecting the sky? Vespasian makes a decision that probably made his engineers break out in a cold sweat. Drain the lake. And in its place, right in the lowlands, on soft, swampy ground, build the largest building in human history. Not a temple, not a library, an arena. A stone leviathan capable of holding the population of an entire city. The Flavian Amphitheatre. This wasn't a gift from a kind grandfather emperor. It was a bribe, a grandiose, unprecedented bribe to the Roman people in exchange for loyalty to the new dynasty. Do you hear that noise? It's not just construction. It is a symphony of imperial rebirth. Thousands of pickaxes biting into the earth simultaneously. The creaking of giant wooden cranes lifting stone blocks. The shouts of overseers and the groans of slaves. Vespasian launched a machine intended to restart Rome's economy. Tens of thousands of unemployed people, the very ones who were ready to riot yesterday, got jobs today. They mixed concrete, they hauled bricks, they built their own prison without even suspecting it. The emperor understood a terrible truth. A people busy with work and anticipating entertainment does not build barricades. But the engineering challenge was colossal. Build a skyscraper of antiquity on a swamp? It sounded like suicide. Roman architects achieved the impossible. They designed a complex drainage system, digging tens of meters into the ground to divert water into the Tiber. They poured the foundation, a monstrous concrete cushion 13 meters thick. Imagine, a ring of concrete that could withstand a meteorite impact. The Romans invented concrete so their empire would stand forever. But here, in this hollow, they used it to build a monument to their cruelty. Every basket of mortar poured into the formwork was a promise. Blood will be spilled here, and you will watch it. Vespasian was in a hurry. He was old. He understood that his time was running out like sand in a water clock. He needed to see this symbol of his power towering over the city. The walls grew with frightening speed. Travertine, brought from the quarries of Tivoli, shone in the sun, white as bleached bone. It was a strange sight. Amidst the mud, soot, and poverty rose a perfectly symmetrical, mathematically precise oval. It was a triumph of order over chaos, a triumph of one man's will over history. But let's be honest, construction on this scale is a black hole for the budget. Even after selling all of Nero's jewels, even after melting down the golden statues of previous tyrants, there wasn't enough money. Concrete is cheap, but the labor of specialists, marble and iron for the clamps binding the stones, all this cost astronomical sums. The Roman economy was exhausted by civil war. Where to get the funds to pay for this celebration of life and death? The soldier emperor knew the answer. Money has no smell, even if it smells like the burning of torched cities. While the foundation was being laid in Rome, in the east, in the distant and rebellious province of Judea, legions under the command of his son Titus were preparing to commit a crime that would pay for Rome's grandeur. The walls of the Colosseum had not yet risen above the first tier, but their shadow already covered Jerusalem. The mechanism had been triggered. The foundation required not just concrete. It required gold. And it required slaves. Lots of slaves. The empire's gaze turned to the east, where an ancient temple held treasures capable of satisfying the insatiable belly of the Roman construction site. The year is 70 AD. Jerusalem. The air here isn't just hot, it's melting. But not from the desert sun, rather from the fire devouring one of the greatest shrines of the ancient world, the Second Temple. The very place where prophets walked has now turned into a giant funeral pyre. Roman legions under the command of Titus, the son of that very Vespasian, breached the walls after an agonizing 5-month siege. This was not pacifying a province. This was total annihilation. Legionaries, drunk on blood and the thirst for profit, didn't just loot. They ripped open history itself. The gold of the temple, accumulated over centuries, sacred vessels, silver trumpets, all of this melted in the fire, flowing down the stone steps in glittering streams, mixing with the ash and blood of the defenders. Have you ever wondered, looking at a postcard of the Colosseum, who actually paid for this banquet? The Flavian Amphitheatre is not just a miracle of Roman engineering. It is a tombstone for Jerusalem. Every arch, every column, every block of travertine was paid for with the stolen gold of Judea. Vespasian got his check. A massive caravan with looted goods stretched from the scorched province to the metropolis. The golden menorah, the 7-branched candelabrum, the symbol of faith for an entire people, now became just a trophy, a line in a ledger, an asset to be converted into political influence. The Roman economy, suffocating in Nero's debts, received an injection of adrenaline so powerful the empire trembled with delight. But gold alone doesn't build walls. Gold doesn't know how to hew stone. For that you need hands, and Titus brought them. 100,000 captives, 100,000 living souls torn from their homes, stripped of their names, status, and future. Imagine this column stretching to the horizon. Doctors, teachers, priests, artisans, the cream of the Judean nation, were now just biomass, fuel for the imperial machine. They went to Rome not as citizens, but as working cattle. Death in the arena did not await them, at least not immediately. The hell of endless construction awaited them. These very people, whose backs still remembered the coolness of the olive groves of Galilee, were now choking in the dust of the Tivoli quarries. 30 kilometers from Rome, the earth was torn open like a giant wound. Here they mined travertine, the stone from which the Colosseum's skeleton is made. This is not soft marble. Travertine is hard, heavy, and temperamental. Roman engineers, those geniuses of logistics, built a special road, the Tiburtina, which could boldly be called the Road of Broken Spines. Imagine this assembly line, 24 hours a day, with no weekends or holidays. 4-wheeled carts drawn by oxen screech so loudly the sound is heard for kilometers. But the oxen only pull. Men load the stone. Blocks weighing 5, 10, 20 tons. They must be cut, hewn, and loaded. One mistake, one awkward movement of a lever, and a man turns into a bloody smear on white stone. No one kept statistics on workplace injuries. If a slave broke, he was simply replaced like a broken pickaxe. 100,000 free pairs of hands allowed Rome not to count its losses. Look closely at the walls of the Colosseum. Do you see those holes in the stone? Many think they are marks of time. No, they are marks of technology. The Romans used iron clamps to fasten the travertine blocks. Concrete went into the foundation and vaults, but the skeleton was held together by iron. 300 tons of iron went into the clamps alone. 300 tons of metal, mined, forged, and installed by those same slaves. The Colosseum is a construction set assembled on blood and sweat. where every detail is fitted with maniacal precision. Vespasian's engineers did not tolerate approximations. Jewish slaves, working under the whips of overseers, created the perfect geometry of death. And in the center of Rome, next to the growing bulk of the amphitheater, Titus erected another monument, his triumphal arch. It stands there today. Walk up to it when you are in Rome and look at the bas-reliefs inside the span. This isn't just art, it is documentary proof of a crime. There, frozen forever in stone, are legionaries carrying that very menorah and the golden table of the showbread on their shoulders. It is a receipt, a confirmation of funds received. The emperors did not hide the source of funding. They were proud of it. Look, citizens of Rome, we looted the temple of a foreign god to build a temple for your pleasures. The cynicism of this exchange is off the charts, but it was exactly what lay at the foundation of imperial ideology. Woe to the vanquished, glory to the victors. Construction proceeded at a frantic pace. Vespasian died in the year 79, never seeing his brainchild completed. But the machine could no longer stop. Titus, having accepted power, drove the engineers. He needed to finish the amphitheater at any cost. It was a matter of his personal prestige. And so, by the year 80, the scaffolding was removed. The giant froze in anticipation. It was dazzling. On the outside, 3 tiers of arches decorated with semicolumns, strict Doric at the bottom, elegant Ionic in the middle, and lush Corinthian at the top. Statues of gods and heroes in every opening looked down on the city with cold arrogance. The walls were clad in marble that shone so brightly in the sun it hurt to look. It was the most majestic building ever constructed by man. But inside, it was empty. A stone sack capable of holding 50,000 spectators. The acoustics were calculated so that a death rattle could be heard in the very top rows. The Colosseum was ready, but it was dead. It lacked the main ingredient, the thing for which the treasures of Jerusalem were melted down and the lives of 100,000 slaves ground into dust. It needed a soul, and only blood could be the soul of this place. Lots of blood. Titus announced the opening date. Rome froze in anticipation. The townspeople knew this would not be just a holiday. It would be an orgy of destruction the likes of which the world had never seen. The emperor was preparing to give the order that would turn this architectural masterpiece into the most efficient death factory in history. The gates were opening, and the arena sand, clean and golden, thirsted for its first victim. The emperor is dead. Long live the emperor! Vespasian, that old cynic who built his power on concrete and taxes, departed this life with a final joke on his lips. Alas, I think I'm becoming a god. He did not live to see the greatest triumph of his life. The ribbon at the opening of the world's greatest amphitheater had to be cut by his son, Titus. The year is 80 AD. Rome was suffocating from the summer heat, but the air trembled not from the heat, but from hysterical expectation. This was not just a festival. It was the most massive PR campaign in human history. Titus, understanding that the love of the crowd is an unstable currency, decided to buy it wholesale. He announced 100 days of games. 100 days of continuous madness. 100 days when work in the city stopped, and all life focused on this stone bowl. Have you ever tried to imagine 100 days of murder? Not as a statistic in a textbook, but as a physical reality. That is 3 months when death becomes routine, like breakfast. In the morning you go to watch the hunt. In the afternoon, the executions. In the evening, the gladiators. And so it went, every day. The Romans turned the destruction of living things into an assembly line. During the inauguration of the Colosseum, 9,000 animals were killed. Think about that number. 9,000. That is not hunting. That is faunal genocide. Soldiers of the Empire combed North Africa and the Middle East, scooping up everything that growled, ran, or crawled. Lions, tigers, elephants, rhinoceroses, hippopotamuses. The Romans saw giraffes and ostriches for the first time, only to watch them die. It was a demonstration of Rome's total power over nature. The emperor was essentially saying, "Look, we haven't just conquered nations, we have conquered chaos itself." Wild beasts, the fear of which is embedded in our DNA, are now just dolls in my hands. The arena turned into a surreal theater. Artists and engineers created sets. Overnight, artificial forests, hills, and cliffs grew on the empty sand. And into these sets, they released animals maddened by fear. A spectator in the first row could smell the musk of an enraged lion, hear the crunch of bones when an archer's arrow pierced a rhino's hide. It was sensory overload, intoxication with impunity. You sit in safety, on cool stone, and look into the eyes of wild nature being killed for your entertainment. But that wasn't enough for Titus. Hunting beasts is classic. He needed a miracle, and he created one. One day, the spectators arriving at the stands couldn't believe their eyes. There was no arena. Instead of yellow sand, water splashed. Deep, dark water reflecting the sky. Roman engineers had achieved the impossible. Using a complex system of sluices and aqueducts, they flooded the amphitheater bowl, turning the center of Rome into a lake. A naumachia, a naval battle within the walls of a building. It sounded like the raving of a madman, but it was reality. Real warships were launched onto the water. Not mock-ups, but heavy biremes and triremes. 3,000 men, convicted criminals and prisoners of war, took their places at the oars and on the decks. They had nothing to lose. Their death was foregone. The only question was exactly how it would come. By the sword, by fire, or by water. A trumpet signal, and hell opened up. This wasn't a theatrical production with wooden swords. This was a real war, compressed to the size of a football field. Rams smashed holes. Men fell into the water and drowned under the weight of armor. The water turned crimson, becoming like thick wine. Imagine the acoustics of this nightmare. An enclosed space, an echo amplifying the screams of the dying and the cracking of breaking wood multiple times over. 50,000 spectators roared with delight, watching one ship sink another. It was the apotheosis of Roman engineering genius and moral decline. They managed to pipe water into a building to stage a massacre there. Technology at the service of death. After the battle, the water was drained, and here the most terrible part began. Corpses, debris, silt, and blood. All this had to be cleaned up overnight. Slaves worked knee-deep in bloody mud, cleaning out the Augean stables so that by morning the arena would shine with cleanliness again. But the naumachia revealed a fatal flaw in the design. Water destroyed everything. The wooden supports holding the arena rotted. The concrete suffered from dampness, and most importantly, the sand. The word arena comes from the Latin harena, sand. It was poured in a thick layer to absorb blood, so the fighters wouldn't slip. But there was too much blood. 100 days of continuous slaughter turned the ground under the amphitheater into a fetid swamp. They couldn't change the sand fast enough. The smell of decomposition began to seep into the stands, mixing with the sense of saffron sprayed on the audience. The old system couldn't cope. The primitive wooden props that allowed for flooding became a problem. To keep the death machine running without glitches, to maintain the tempo and scale of the spectacles, a complete rebuild of the engine was required. The games of the year 80 showed Rome needs more than just an arena. Rome needs a transformer stage, a place where death can be hidden until the right moment. Naumachia were cancelled forever. Water was replaced by stone. The engineers of Domitian, Titus's brother, picked up shovels. They had to dig out a dark, stifling heart beneath the shining arena, the existence of which the spectators above didn't even suspect. They began to build the hypogeum. Take the marble mask off the face of Rome, and you will see a skull. Remove the wooden decking of the arena, sprinkled with golden sand, and you will see the guts of the monster. What tourists today mistake for the ruins of a maze under the open sky was once the darkest, stuffiest, and most high-tech place in the empire. The hypogeum, translated from Greek, underground. But for those who worked there, the word translated more simply, hell. When Titus died, his brother Domitian, a paranoid and a perfectionist, decided that simple pits with sand were not enough. He needed magic. He needed drama. And he ordered a 2-level complex to be dug under the arena, a complex system of corridors and cells poured with concrete and covered with oak beams. This was the heart of the machine. If a celebration of death reigned above, here, below, reigned the dictatorship of mechanics. Imagine a space where the sun never penetrates. The only light is the soot of oil lamps, snatching wet, damp walls out of the darkness. The air here isn't just stale, it's thick. A mixture of the smell of animal manure, human sweat, rotten straw, and fear. There is no ventilation. In summer, the temperature rose to 40 degrees Celsius, and in this stifling stone sack, hundreds of slaves turned the wheels of history. Literally. Domitian's engineers created a miracle that was 1,500 years ahead of its time. 28 elevators. 28 vertical lifts arranged around the perimeter of the arena. It wasn't magic. It was physics raised to an absolute. A system of counterweights, ropes, and pulleys. Each cage with an animal, be it a lion weighing 200 kilograms or a bear, was hoisted up manually. Have you ever tried to lift a piano to the 5th floor without an elevator? Now imagine that piano was trying to kill you. 8 slaves harnessed themselves to a huge wooden winch, a capstan. They pushed it with their chests, their feet slipping in the mud, winding thick ropes onto a drum. The creak of wood stretched to the limit sounded like the groan of the building itself. The mechanism worked flawlessly. The cage rose to the ceiling of the dungeon, a trap door opened there, and the beast ended up in a vestibule right under the level of the sand. One more effort, a jerk, and the flaps above flew open. For the spectator in the stands, it looked like sorcery. A second ago, the arena was empty, and suddenly, as if from nowhere, as if from the earth itself, a pack of tigers grew, or a forest, or a mountain. The effect of sudden appearance was the main special effect of antiquity. The crowd roared with delight, not thinking about the hellish choreography behind this trick. Romans loved surprises. Engineers designed hinged platforms that threw beasts onto the arena, forcing them to run forward out of fear and disorientation. It was an assembly line. While one line was tearing a victim apart upstairs, the next was already being loaded downstairs. But let's go lower, to the eye level of a slave stagehand. You are nobody here. You are a part of the mechanism that can be replaced if it breaks. You work in narrow corridors where 2 people can barely pass each other. And right next to you, along these same corridors, predators are being led. Between you and death is only a grate, and sometimes just luck. The roar of hungry beasts locked in cramped cages bounces off stone walls, creating acoustic chaos. Animals brought from Africa went crazy from the darkness and smells. They threw themselves against the bars, growled, urinated from stress. And all of this flowed under people's feet. In the hypogeum, there was a hierarchy of horror. There were those who turned the winches. There were those who cleaned the cages. And there were the bestiari, beastmasters, whose task was to drive the beast into the elevator. No tasers, no tranquilizers, only with a torch and a whip. One wrong move, and a tiger bites off your arm before it even sees sunlight. And what if the mechanism jams? What if the elevator gets stuck halfway? The Emperor tolerates no delays. The show must go on. Slaves climbed into shafts, risking being crushed by counterweights to fix a jammed pulley. Their lives were worth nothing. In the Colosseum's expense ledgers, grease for the wheels cost more than food for the slave turning that wheel. Imperial propaganda worked flawlessly. Above, divine order. Below, the chaos that this order tames. The hypogeum was Rome's dirty secret. The spectator wasn't supposed to see the sweat. He was supposed to see ease. The grandeur of the empire was built on the fact that hard labor was hidden behind the scenes. The concrete walls of the dungeon still bear traces of this nameless penal servitude. Archaeologists find graffiti there, scratched during rare moments of rest, bones of hastily eaten chickens, and dice. Even in hell, people tried to live. But the scariest thing about this machine wasn't how it worked, but who it worked for. The mechanisms lifted not only beasts, they lifted people. Those who had to meet these beasts, or each other. In the darkness of the hypogeum, in separate cells, the main actors of this drama awaited their entrance. They heard every footstep above. They heard 50,000 throats chanting other people's names. They knew. In a few minutes, the trapdoor would open, and light would hit their eyes, blinding them before the fight. This death machine needed not just fuel from slave muscles, and not just victims. It needed stars. The product of this factory was not just a corpse, but a beautiful corpse. The economy of spectacles demanded professionals. And while the winches creaked, lifting another batch of the doomed, in special barracks far from the filth of the dungeon, those who turned murder into the highest-paid art of antiquity were preparing to go out. Those considered lower than dirt, but whose names were whispered in the bedrooms of aristocrats. Gladiators. Forget everything you've seen in Hollywood blockbusters. Forget those endless rows of cannon fodder killed by the hundreds in 5 minutes of screen time. The reality of the Roman arena was far more cynical, complex, and, if you will, modern. A gladiator is not just a slave with a sword. He is a walking investment portfolio. He is an asset with high liquidity and huge risks. In a world where human life cost pennies, these people were worth fortunes. No one in their right mind would destroy a Ferrari just to hear the beautiful sound of metal hitting concrete. The Roman economy of death operated by the laws of a harsh market. The lanista, the owner of a gladiator school, was not just a jailer, but a venture capitalist. He found strong guys in slave markets, bought them, and invested astronomical sums in them. Years of training, a team of masseurs, the best trainers, and, of course, medicine. Paradoxically, a gladiator in the ludus received better medical care than a free Roman citizen of average means. The famous physician Galen, whose works would be studied for the next 1,500 years, began his career right here, stitching up torn wounds and setting bones for fighters. He learned anatomy not on corpses, but on living, pulsating bodies of arena superstars. Why? Because every scar that took a fighter out of action was a hole in the owner's pocket. Look at their diet. You think they ate roasted meat, washing it down with wine like barbarians at a feast? No. The science of sports nutrition was born not in the 20th century, but here, in the gladiator barracks. They were called horderii, barley men. Their ration was a strict, scientifically calculated diet. Barley porridge, beans, vegetables, and ash. Yes, they drank beverages with added wood ash, a primitive but effective source of calcium to strengthen bones. They were involuntary vegetarians, but not skinny ascetics. They were massive tanks. Gladiators were specially fattened, so they would build up a layer of subcutaneous fat. This wasn't for beauty, it was biological armor. Fat protected nerve endings and arteries from superficial cuts. When a blade sliced the skin, it looked bloody and spectacular for the crowd, but the fighter remained in action. The show went on. But the main paradox lay not in the diet, but in social status. A gladiator in Rome is a creature stuck between worlds. From a legal point of view, he is infamia, disgraceful, a person stripped of all civil rights. He is lower than a prostitute, lower than a beggar, lower than the dirt under your feet. He swore a terrible oath.
Uri, vinciri, verberari, ferroque necari.
To be burned, bound, beaten, and killed by the sword. He voluntarily or forcibly gave his body into the possession of another, becoming a thing. His word meant nothing in court. He could not be buried in a cemetery for decent people. He was a living dead man. And at the same time, he was a god. Women from high society, wives of senators and patricians, lost their minds at the sight of these disgraceful men. The gladiator was the sex symbol of the era. A merchandising industry flourished around the arena that would make modern marketers' jaws drop. You think selling bathwater from an Instagram model is news? Romans did this 2,000 years ago, only more hardcore. After a fight, sweat mixed with oil, dust, and blood was scraped off the winners' bodies with a special tool, a strigil. This substance was bottled in small vials and sold for crazy money as a powerful aphrodisiac. Roman matrons rubbed strangers' sweat into their skin, dreaming of the touch of a beast. The blood of an executed gladiator was considered a cure for epilepsy. It was drunk hot, believing the fighter's life force would pass to the sick person. They despised them, and they lusted after them. It was the schizophrenia of an entire civilization. In the arena itself, chaos did not reign, but strict regulation. Fighting is a sport, cruel, bloody, but a sport. There were referees, summa rudis, who watched the rules, separated fighters in a clinch, and could stop the fight if equipment broke. The death of a professional in the arena was the exception rather than the rule. Statistics collected by historians tell us that in the 1st century AD, 9 out of 10 gladiators survived combat. Why? Because it's expensive. Imagine the situation. The organizer of the games, the editor, most often a politician wanting to buy votes, rents a squad of fighters from a lanista. If the gladiator survives and returns to the barracks, the editor pays only for the rental. But if the gladiator dies, oh, then the meter starts running for the full value. And the price of a champion could equal the cost of building a small temple. Killing a gladiator meant bankrupting the sponsor. Therefore, when the defeated raised a finger, asking for mercy, the organizer often looked at the crowd pleadingly. "Please, let him go. I don't have an extra 100,000 sestertii. Death was a premium service. It was bought only for special occasions, or when the crowd fell into such a frenzy that refusing it was more dangerous than going broke. But this cynical calculation didn't cancel out the fear. You stand in a dark corridor, oiled up, gripping the handle of a gladius. You hear the roar of 50,000 throats demanding a spectacle. You know your opponent is a professional just like you, who ate the same porridge and slept in the next cell. But today he must try to kill you. And if you lose, your fate will depend not on skill, but on the whim of a fat man in the imperial box, and the mood of a crowd that might simply be bored. What forced them to go out onto the sand time after time? Fear of punishment? Yes. But also hope. Ghostly, distant as a star. The rudis, a wooden sword, the symbol of freedom. A gladiator who proved his valor and survived dozens of fights could receive this sword and the right to retire, become a trainer, a bodyguard, or simply a free man with a pile of money and a fan base. It was the greatest lottery in history. Bet your life, and maybe you'll hit the jackpot. They were slaves who could become richer than their masters, and this twisted Roman dream drove them forward, under the roar of the stands, into the embrace of the one who really controlled this place. Not the emperor, not the lanista, but the multi-headed monster sitting on the stone benches. The crowd. Look at them. Tear your eyes away from the bloodied sand and look up. There, where the true master of this place boils, screams, and pulsates. 50,000 people. Close your eyes and try to imagine this sound. This isn't the noise of a stadium during a soccer match. This is the roar of the elements, a physical wave of pressure capable of bursting eardrums. The Flavian architects designed the bowl to work as a giant resonator. Every scream, every sigh, every curse was amplified by the stone, turning into a deafening rumble that made the walls of the palaces on the Palatine vibrate. The Colosseum is not a theater, it is a parliament. The only place in the empire where the people, deprived of the right to vote in elections, found a voice capable of toppling kings. Here, in these stands, Rome was presented in cross-section, as if dissected by a surgeon's scalpel. Social stratification frozen in stone. Below, at the very edge of the arena, where one could make out the fear in a dying man's eyes and smell the blood, sat those who owned the world. Senators in snow-white togas with a broad purple border. Vestal virgins, priestesses, keepers of the sacred fire, the only women allowed to sit in the front row. This was the elite zone, marble chairs where the fates of provinces were decided. Higher up began the world of equestrians and wealthy citizens. Even higher, the plebs. And there, in the very nosebleeds, under the scorching sun, on wooden benches huddled those whom Rome despised, but without whom it could not exist. Women, the poor, and slaves. 50 meters above the ground, the stuffiness there was unbearable. The smell of the sweat of thousands of bodies mixed with the aroma of cheap food and garlic. But it was from there, from the cheap seats, that the most furious shouts often came. This vertical slice of society was a single organism, a multi-headed hydra that the emperor was obliged to feed with spectacles so it wouldn't devour him instead. The emperor sat in his box on a raised platform. Seemingly, he is a god. He is the commander of legions. But within the walls of the Colosseum, the balance of power shifted. Here, he was vulnerable. He was 1 against 50,000. He couldn't hide behind the backs of the Praetorian Guard. He was obliged to be present. The Roman people did not forgive rulers for indifference to their entertainment. Julius Caesar made a mistake by reading letters during fights, and the crowd hated him for this arrogance. Augustus, a wise fox, sat for hours watching the slaughter, feigning sincere interest, because he knew attention is also currency. The Colosseum was a space for harsh political dialogue. The crowd, drunk on blood and a sense of camaraderie, lost its fear. It was here, in the pauses between murders, that the people presented bills to the authorities. The chanting of 50,000 throats is impossible to ignore. Give us back our bread. Execute the thieving prefect. Lower taxes. The emperor had to react. He had to smile, nod, send heralds with promises. If he showed weakness or fear, they would tear him apart. If he showed excessive harshness, a riot would begin that would burn the city down. It was walking on a razor's edge. The world's greatest tyrants sat in this box, sweating under their togas, and fawned over bakers and cobblers whom, outside the arena walls, they didn't even consider human. Cruelty here was not just entertainment. It was a language of communication, a universal code understood by both patrician and slave. And the culmination of this dialogue was the moment of the verdict. The gladiator fell. The weapon flew from his hands. The winner placed his foot on the throat of the defeated and raised his blade. And in that moment, time stopped. The entire colossal machine of the empire froze. The judge looked at the emperor's box. The emperor looked at the people. We are used to thinking we know this gesture. Thumb down, death; up, life. Hollywood taught us that. But historians still argue about what exactly this gesture looked like. Perhaps the turned thumb meant a bared blade, an order to finish him off. Perhaps a thumb tucked into a fist meant sword in the scabbard. But the mechanics of the gesture are not as important as its essence. What is important is that in this second, the power over life and death passed from the emperor to the crowd. Imagine yourself in the place of a simple Roman. You are nobody. You live in a cramped room, eat bad bread. Any soldier on the street can hit you. But today, right now, you are the arbiter of fates. Whether this armor-clad athlete sees tomorrow's sunrise depends on the turn of your wrist. It is a drug. It is an intoxicating feeling of absolute power that the powers that be fed to the people in doses. Look, they said, you decide. You are Rome. And the crowd roared, feeling like an accomplice to divine providence. Kill him! He fought like a coward, screams the neighbor on the left, spraying saliva. Spare him! He is a brave man, squeals the matron on the right. 50,000 judges pass sentence. And woe to that emperor who goes against the will of this beast. If the crowd demanded mercy, and the princeps gave the sign to finish him, he risked facing a rebellion before sunset. The Colosseum was a safety valve. Here they let off steam. Aggression that could have spilled over into revolution spilled onto the arena sand along with the blood of gladiators. The spectator in the stands was not a victim of propaganda. He was its active, greedy accomplice. It was a perfect system of checks and balances built on violence. A sacred contract between the palace and the street. We give you blood, you give us obedience. It seemed this structure would work forever. Until a man ascended the throne, who decided that being just a spectator wasn't enough for him. A man who didn't want to listen to the crowd, but wanted the crowd to worship him as a gladiator. The system, having survived a dozen emperors, cracked when a madman appeared in the imperial box who desired to personally descend into hell and become its king. The son of a philosopher who became Rome's nightmare. Commodus. History loves cruel irony. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, spent nights in a tent on the border, writing down his stoic reflections on duty, restraint, and service to Rome. He was the embodiment of Roman virtue, and his son, Commodus, became the embodiment of the Roman nightmare. When he put on a lion skin, imitating Hercules, the empire shuddered not from greatness, but from shame. The sacred contract between power and the people, so carefully built by Vespasian and Titus, was not just broken. It was drowned in the madness of one man. The Colosseum, that complex political instrument, turned into a psychopath's toy in Commodus's hands. Imagine this moment. The sun is at its zenith. 50,000 spectators are waiting for the heroes to emerge. But the gates open, and onto the sand steps not a slave, not a prisoner of war, not a professional fighter from a Lannista's school. The emperor himself walks out, the master of the world, a living god. He descends from the heavens of his box into the mud of the arena. For the Roman mentality, this wasn't just a shock. It was cognitive dissonance comparable to a modern president of a nuclear power entering a ring in wrestlers' trunks to hit disabled people with a chair. The emperor voluntarily became infamia, dishonorable. He erased the line between the purple of the throne and the blood of the slaughterhouse. Commodus didn't want to rule. He wanted to kill. But in his actions, there wasn't an ounce of the risk that made gladiators idols. It was a farce. A bloody, nauseating circus. He went into the arena with a sword made of the finest steel, while his opponents were often given weapons made of lead or wood. He fought 735 fights. 735 times he raised his hand in a sign of victory. But whom did he defeat? Eyewitness accounts, such as those of the historian and senator Cassius Dio, paint a picture not of heroic duels, but of pathological cruelty. Commodus loved killing animals, but not in a fair hunt. He shot them with a bow from a safe platform fenced with a net. Giraffes, ostriches, gazelles, defenseless targets for a bored sadist. Once he personally beheaded an ostrich with a special crescent-shaped arrow tip. The bird was still running in a circle, spurting blood, while the emperor approached the senatorial box. In one hand he held a bloody sword, in the other, the severed head of the ostrich. He didn't say a word. He just smirked and nodded his head. The message was clear. I can do the same to you. The senators sitting in the front rows froze in horror. But the scariest feeling wasn't fear. It was laughter. Nervous, hysterical laughter, rising to the throat at the sight of this absurd buffoon, smeared in blood and feathers, imagining himself to be Hercules. To laugh meant signing your own death warrant. Cassius Dio describes how respected elders, rulers of provinces, pulled laurel leaves from their wreaths and chewed them. The bitter taste of laurel helped control facial muscles, helped not to burst out laughing in the face of death. The empire's greatest minds sat and chewed grass to survive their master's performance. It was the agony of Roman dignity. The madness escalated. Commodus got bored with animals. He needed people. But killing gladiators was dangerous. Even with a dull sword, a pro could accidentally nick the divine body. So the emperor found new enemies. He ordered cripples, people who had lost their legs due to disease or accidents, to be gathered in the arena. They were dressed in costumes of mythical giants, given stones and sponges instead of weapons. And Commodus, the great Roman Hercules, walked among them with a club, beating them to death one by one, like cattle. The crowd, accustomed to cruelty but respecting martial valor, watched this in deathly silence. This was not sport. This was not the execution of criminals. This was a massacre in a psychiatric hospital, where the head doctor was the main patient. He demanded payment for his performances. Every time the emperor stepped into the arena, he wrote an invoice to the treasury. 1,000,000 sestertii per fight. He was bankrupting Rome, forcing the empire to pay for the pleasure of watching his perversions. The Colosseum, created by Vespasian as a gift to the people, as a way to buy loyalty, turned into an instrument of personal narcissism. The system broke. The spectator no longer felt like an accomplice to greatness. He felt like a hostage to a maniac. Instead of sublimating the crowd's aggression, Commodus provoked disgust. The magic of the arena relied on the illusion of justice. The strongest wins, the crowd spares the bravest. The emperor destroyed this illusion. When he killed a wounded gladiator who begged for mercy, he spat on the will of the people. He showed, there are no rules here. There is only my whim. This was a turning point. The aura of the sanctity of power, held for centuries, dissipated. If Caesar is just a sweaty, cruel killer hacking up ostriches and legless cripples, then why obey him? Commodus was strangled in his own bath by his wrestling coach, an irony worthy of his life. But the poison he injected into the empire's veins was already working. The Colosseum stood, still shining with marble, but the foundation beneath it, the moral foundation of the Roman world, had developed a crack that could no longer be patched. The era of golden madness was ending. Clouds of a real, cold crisis were gathering on the horizon. The money was running out, the borders were cracking, and a new faith, quiet and unnoticed, was already beginning to whisper that death in the arena is not a celebration, but a sin. The death machine was preparing for its last, longest, and most painful battle. The battle with oblivion and a new morality. The party was over. The hangover was long, painful, and fatal. After the bloody frenzy of Commodus and the leapfrog of soldier emperors, Rome woke up in a new reality. The 3rd and 4th centuries. The golden age of the Antonines melted away like a mirage in the desert. The empire was no longer an omnipotent predator bringing riches from all ends of the earth. It had become an old, sick lioness, bitten by barbarians from all sides and devoured from within by inflation. The economy, that is the true killer of the Colosseum. Not morality, but a banal lack of cash stopped this machine. Imagine the accounting of death in an era of decline. The silver denarius devalued so much it turned into a piece of copper with a thin coating of silver. Prices skyrocketed. Bringing a lion from Africa, feeding it meat, paying for sea transport, the services of handlers, all this became astronomically expensive. The empire, which used to spend millions to amuse the crowd, now counted every sestertius to pay mercenaries on the border. Bread and circuses. This slogan worked when the granaries were bursting with Egyptian grain. Now, as provinces fell away one by one, the authorities had to choose: feed the legions or buy a new gladiator. The choice was obvious. But there was another factor. A quiet, invisible virus changing the DNA of Roman society. Christianity. At first, it was a sect of marginalized people hiding in catacombs. But by the 4th century, the cross had replaced the eagle on the standards of the legions. Emperor Constantine made the new faith the state religion, and this faith brought with it new optics. For a pagan, the sight of a torn body was a triumph of fate, a moment of truth. For a Christian, it was a desecration of the temple of the soul. Man is created in the image and likeness of God, which means killing him for entertainment is a spit in the Creator's face. However, inertia is a terrible force. Even baptized Rome couldn't immediately give up its main drug addiction. Constantine, that pragmatist, banned branding criminals on the face, declaring that a face created in the divine likeness should not be disfigured. But he didn't close the arenas. The games continued. Priests cursed the amphitheatre from the pulpits, calling it a temple of demons. But their flock, leaving Sunday liturgy, still went to take seats in the stands to see fresh blood. A habit developed over centuries turned out to be stronger than the new morality. The breaking point happened not in bureaucratic offices, but right on the sand. Legend has preserved the name of the man who became the catalyst for the end. The monk Telemachus. They say he came from the east, from the desert, where people sought God in silence. In the early 5th century, when Rome was already reeling under the blows of the Visigoths, Telemachus walked into the Colosseum. He saw a fight. 2 living death machines were hacking at each other to the delighted howl of the crowd. And the monk did something unthinkable for the Roman mentality. He jumped over the barrier. Imagine the scene. A small, frail figure in a rough robe runs across the golden sand toward giants clad in armor. He stands between them. He shouts, trying to stop the slaughter. What did the crowd do? Did they admire his courage? Did they think about the salvation of their souls? No. The crowd went into a rage. Who is this madman daring to interrupt their pleasure? "Kill him!" roared the stands. And this wasn't a metaphor. Stones flew at Telemachus. Pieces of marble torn from the seats flew at the prophet, who dared to stand athwart the will of the people. The gladiators probably lent a hand too. The monk was beaten to death. His blood mixed with the blood of the fighters. He died not as a hero, but as an annoying hindrance, trash on the stage. But his death became the last straw that broke history's patience. Emperor Honorius, learning of what happened, was forced to act. The year 404 AD. Remember this date. This is the year the Colosseum's heart stopped. An official ban on gladiatorial combat. The schools of Lanistas closed. Professional killers faded into history. The great machine, which had operated for more than 3 centuries, creaked and halted. However, the agony wasn't instant. The Colosseum died a long and painful death. The gladiators left, but the beasts remained. Animal baiting, venationes, continued for another century. The church did not forbid killing lions and bears. Beasts have no souls. But look at these games of the 6th century. It is a pathetic shadow of former greatness. Instead of thousands of exotic monsters, a couple of mangy bears and boars caught in a nearby forest. Instead of complex set design, an empty, dirty arena. The Empire simply had no money to repair the lifts. The elevators of the Hypogeum rotted, the mechanisms rusted. Beasts were simply driven out of gates like cattle to slaughter. The magic vanished. Only the routine of murder remained. And then nature delivered the coup de grâce. The earth shook. In the mid-5th century and early 6th, powerful earthquakes shook Italy. The Colosseum, that stone colossus, couldn't withstand it. The south wall collapsed. Imagine the crash when thousands of tons of travertine, having stood for half a millennium, collapsed to the ground, raising a cloud of dust that covered the city. No one bothered to restore it. Rome, whose population had shrunk from 1 million to a pitiful few tens of thousands, had neither the strength nor the desire to fix a monument to its pagan past. The arena emptied. The wind chased trash through the rows where senators once sat. Trees began to sprout in the cracks between the stones, destroying the masonry with their roots. The drainage channels clogged, and the hypogeum, that hellish labyrinth, flooded with fetid sludge. The Colosseum turned into a giant dead skeleton towering over a dying city. It was no longer needed. It had become alien. And just at that moment, when the fear of the amphitheater's grandeur disappeared, the Romans looked at it with new eyes. They saw in it not a symbol of empire, not a temple of death, and not even an architectural monument. They saw a warehouse, a free, endless warehouse of excellent, pre-hewn stone and priceless iron. The great pillage began. Rome died. The great predator, whose growl made Parthians and Picts tremble, shrank to the size of a pathetic, frightened mongrel. The city's population, once exceeding 1 million people, plummeted to 30,000. Imagine empty streets overgrown with grass where goats wander. The Forum, the center of the world, turned into the Campo Vaccino, the cow field. And in the middle of this post-apocalyptic landscape, he towered. A giant, useless skeleton. The Colosseum was no longer a theater of death. It had become too big for the shrunken city. People no longer had the numbers to fill its stands, and they didn't have the money to feed the beasts. But the Colosseum retained one value that barbaric times prized above all else. It was made of stone. And it was made of iron. The Middle Ages were an era of pragmatism, bordering on survival. If a building cannot be used for its intended purpose, it must be repurposed. And the Colosseum turned into the strangest communal apartment in history. In the 12th century, the powerful Roman Frangipani clan seized it. These feudal lords looked at the amphitheater not as an architectural monument, but as a ready-made fortress. They bricked up the arches of the first floor, turning them into impregnable walls. Inside, where the crowd once roared, residential towers, stables, and warehouses grew. The arena, soaked in the blood of martyrs and gladiators, became the inner courtyard of a castle where laundry was dried and stew was cooked. Do you smell that? It is no longer the smell of fear and saffron. It is the smell of manure. For centuries, the arcades of the Colosseum were rented out. Blacksmiths, cobblers, priests, and thieves lived here. In the dark corridors where senators once strolled, they now stored hay and cheap wine. The Flavian Amphitheatre became a manure market. Documents from that time mention that the right to collect animal excrement inside the ruins was a valuable asset people sued over. The greatest structure of antiquity was humiliated by domestic life. Its grandeur dissolved in the smell of rotten straw and smoke from hearths. But the real murder of the Colosseum was committed not by peasants who set up a barn in it. It was committed by those who wanted to build a new, Christian Rome. The city began to wake from its centuries-long sleep. It needed new palaces and new cathedrals. And then the Pope's architects looked at the amphitheatre and saw not history. They saw a warehouse. A giant, free warehouse of magnificent, pre-hewn travertine. Why spend money and effort sending slaves to the quarries of Tivoli? Why haul stone 30 kilometers if a mountain of ready-made blocks stands in the center of the city? The great pillage began. The Colosseum officially became a stone quarry. Popes, God's vicars on earth, issued official licenses for the demolition of walls. Imagine the rumble that hung over Rome for centuries. The creak of winches, the blows of hammers. Workers busily dismantled the outer ring, dropping multi-ton blocks down. The stone fell, crushing the cobblestones. It was loaded onto carts and taken away to build palazzos for the pontiff's nephews. Look at the facade of St. Peter's Basilica, the greatest shrine of the Catholic world. The foundation, the steps, part of the walls, this is the flesh of the Colosseum. Pagan stone, having absorbed the blood of thousands of victims, was baptized and laid in the foundation of a temple of love and mercy. What irony! Rome devoured itself to be reborn. Palazzo Venezia, Palazzo Farnese, Palazzo Barberini. All these Renaissance masterpieces we admire today are children who ate their parent. Michelangelo and Raphael, those geniuses of art, walked around Rome admiring antique proportions, while their patrons turned those proportions into construction debris. But the stone is half the trouble. Walk up to the walls of the Colosseum today. Get close. Do you see those countless holes pockmarking the stone blocks, like giant pox scars? Many tourists think these are traces of war, shelling, or erosion. No, they are traces of greed. The Romans knew the secret of their ancestors. The Colosseum's blocks were held not by mortar, but by iron clamps. 300 tons of select metal were hidden inside the walls. In the Middle Ages, when ore mining technologies were lost, iron was worth its weight in gold. Swords, plows, horseshoes were made from it, and people began hunting for metal. They punched holes in the travertine, knowing exactly where the joint of the blocks was. They tore out the iron clamps with chunks of stone, crippling the masonry, leaving gaping wounds. The entire Colosseum today is a monument to looting. It stands riddled with thousands of holes as proof that for a hungry man, history has no flavor. He needs metal to forge a knife. The iron that held the empire together was melted down into weapons for petty feudal squabbles. The robbery was so massive that a saying was born in Rome, malicious and precise as a stiletto strike. Quod non fecerunt barbari, fecerunt barberini. Asterisk, quote, dash, quote. But the barbarians didn't do, the barberini did, quote. This was a stone thrown at the garden of the powerful Pope Urban VIII of the Barberini family, who was particularly zealous in dismantling antique ruins. Rome's elite built their well-being on the ruins of the past. They didn't see beauty in the Colosseum. They saw a resource, an asset, book value. By the 15th century, only a third of the giant remained. The north side survived only because it was harder to dismantle, while the south side collapsed and was dragged away to the foundation. The Colosseum turned into a romantic ruin, overgrown with ivy and wildflowers. Botanists counted more than 400 plant species on its ruins, a unique microflora, seeds of which were brought here along with fodder for exotic beasts 1,000 years ago. Even in its death, even being robbed and stripped, it continued to birth life. But this was already the life of weeds on a grave. It seemed that another 100 or 200 years of such renovation, and only a dusty spot on the map would remain of the amphitheatre. It was saved only by a miracle. And this miracle came not from architects, but from those who remembered whose blood actually soaked this sand. The ghost of death that hovered over the arena suddenly became its only protector. In the mid-18th century, when the Colosseum had almost turned into a skeleton, it was saved by a lie. Or, to be more precise, a beautiful historical error. Pope Benedict XIV looked at these looted ruins and saw in them not a quarry, but a shrine. In the year 1749, he declared the Colosseum a site of martyrdom for the first Christians. A huge cross was erected in the middle of the arena, where the blood of gladiators and beasts had soaked in for centuries. It was a brilliant decision. Historians still argue whether Christians were actually executed en masse right here. Most likely not. Most martyrs met their death in the Circus of Nero or other arenas, while the Colosseum was a place for professional shows, not religious reprisals. But who cares about the truth when it comes to saving heritage? The consecration worked better than any UNESCO-protected status. Touching the stones became a sin. The looting stopped instantly. The very people who yesterday were gouging out iron clamps came here today to pray. kissing the very travertine their grandfathers sold by weight. Religion, which once condemned the games, now became the sole guardian of their arena. From this moment, the Colosseum began its new life, the life of a romantic ghost. It became a mandatory stop on the route for European intellectuals making the grand tour. Byron, Dickens, Goethe, they all stood here, looking at the moon through the empty sockets of the arches. But they didn't see horror. They saw melancholy. For them, these ruins were a symbol of the futility of human effort. While the Colosseum stands, Rome shall stand. When the Colosseum falls, Rome shall fall. When Rome falls, the world shall fall. This phrase, attributed to pilgrims of the 8th century, became the mantra of romantics. They admired the aesthetics of decay, not hearing the screams of ghosts. The arena became overgrown with an exotic garden, and poets walked among flowers growing on bones, composing verses about eternity. But the 20th century did not tolerate melancholy. It needed power. In 1922, Benito Mussolini came to power in Italy. Il Duce dreamed of reviving the Roman Empire, and the Colosseum became the perfect backdrop for him. Fascism appropriated the aesthetics of antiquity. Mussolini ordered the space around the amphitheater cleared, ruthlessly tearing down medieval neighborhoods to lay a wide street, Via dei Fori Imperiali. He wanted his legions of black shirts to march against the backdrop of Flavian grandeur, creating a direct visual link between the fasces of the lictors and fascist symbolism. The Colosseum again became a political instrument, a background for speeches by a new dictator who, like the Caesars of the past, promised the people greatness in exchange for freedom. And here we are, in the 21st century. The Colosseum has survived emperors, popes, barbarians, and fascists. Now it is experiencing the most massive invasion in its history. Tourists. 7 million people a year. That is more than the population of all of Rome in its heyday. They come in an endless stream, in shorts and sandals, clutching smartphones instead of swords. Restored, cleaned by sandblasting machines of centuries of soot, reinforced with modern materials, it stands like an obedient pensioner, ready to take pictures with the grandkids. But look at this spectacle with a sober eye. There is something frighteningly surreal about it. People take selfies, smiling broadly, against the backdrop of a place where 100,000 people were torn apart and 1 million animals killed for fun. Newlyweds hold wedding photo shoots where slaves died in puddles of their own urine and blood. We have turned the scaffold into an attraction, bought a magnet with a gladiator, drank a Coke, and moved on. The Colosseum has become sterile. We washed away the blood, removed the smell of rot, installed turnstiles and audio guides. We made death safe and consumable. However, the stone itself hasn't gone anywhere. It still remembers. If you come here at night, when the tourist hum subsides, and place your hand on the rough travertine, you will feel the cold. It is the cold of eternity, looking at us with irony. The Colosseum is a mirror. It reflects what we are at any given moment. For Vespasian, it was a bribe to the people. For Christians, a place of holiness. For Mussolini, a symbol of power. For us, it's just a checkmark on a list of sites. But its architecture, its flawless logistics, its ability to control the crowd, all of this remains. The machine isn't broken. It's just turned off. It is waiting. We like to think we are better than the Romans, that we are more civilized. We don't go to watch lions tear people apart. We are too humane for that. But is that so? Has our thirst for spectacles changed? Do we not demand blood on social networks, destroying people's reputations with a single click? Do millions not watch videos of real disasters and violence, hiding behind the safety of screens, just as Romans hid behind the high walls of the stands. Technology has changed, but the psychology of the crowd remains the same. The Colosseum proved a terrible theorem. Give people bread, give them the right to watch someone else's pain with impunity, and they will forgive you everything. They will allow you to be a tyrant if you are a good showrunner. The Flavian Amphitheatre stands in the center of modern Rome, like a giant question mark carved from stone. It reminds us that the line between civilization and barbarism is thinner than a gladiator's blade. The Romans invented concrete so the empire would stand forever, but they used it to build a monument to their cruelty. We inherited this monument. But did we inherit the wisdom not to repeat their path? Imagine for a second, if tomorrow the gates of the Colosseum opened again, if a broadcast of a real fight to the death was announced all over the world, with modern gladiators, with real blood, without special effects, and you knew it wasn't a movie, would you change the channel? Or would you, like those 50,000 ghosts in the stands, stay to watch, waiting for the moment when you can turn your thumb down?